If you listen to the news, you've probably heard about this insane heat wave in Australia. Now, it should be clarified that Australia is no stranger to heat waves. The landmass is a huge continental slab filled with a burning desert, and in the summer, it can get well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The native wildlife has adapted to this heat, either by evolving a greater biochemical tolerance to it, or by developing behavioral strategies that reduce their exposure to heat, or that increase their rate at which their bodies cool down. But these adaptive strategies can only go so far. Really extreme heat events just can't be overcome, and they'll end up broiling the exposed organisms. What Australia is experiencing now is a really extreme heat event. It's been a sustained 47 degrees Celsius, or 116 degrees Fahrenheit, for days. At times, it's reached 50 degrees Celsius, or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Needless to say, this has been really hard for the people and the animals that live there. It's really crazy what's happening. For example, probably the craziest thing that I've heard is that entire rivers have more or less evaporated. Rivers that were once wide and deep and full of fish have been burned away until all that remains is a thin trickle of warm, muddy water. The populations of fish have crashed, and some rivers simply cannot sustain the fish that they once did. There was a citizen report of the discovery of a family of wild horses, all of them dead from dehydration. The dead horses were found near a water reservoir called Deep Hole, which might seem strange because they died of dehydration. Well, it turns out that the water reservoir has evaporated. Any water that might be left in Deep Hole was underground and inaccessible. According to the citizens who discovered the horses, Deep Hole has never been dry before. So that's really bad. It's an undeniable sign of how destructive this heat wave is. The famous Australian koala is also suffering, as they've struggled to adapt to the hotter, drier conditions that are plaguing Australia thanks to climate change. The koalas are dependent on eucalyptus trees, but these trees are suffering in the dry heat. Their tissues are drying out, and this threatens the koalas, as they get virtually all of their water from the eucalyptus leaves. Consider the plight of the Pteropus poliocephalus, or the gray-headed flying fox, which is an endangered type of giant bat, also called a megabat. It's a really big bat, is the point, I guess. They have a meter-long wingspan, so they're pretty big. They're beautiful, endangered animals. And when it's hot, they're known to hide under tree canopies and stay low to the ground, where it's relatively cool. But the flying foxes have spread out from their southerly forests into urban habitats and other places where they don't have an extensive tree canopy to hide under. As a result, this insane heat wave has caught thousands of them out in the open, and at the time of this recording, at least 4,000 of them have baked to death. The heat is exhausting for them, and they can't even hold themselves up in a tree. They'll just fall down dead. This has happened to at least 4,000 of them, and most likely there's hundreds, if not thousands more, that just haven't been discovered or accounted for. What's really scary is that this isn't even the worst case for Australian bats. In a similar heat wave in November of last year, a species called Pteropus conspicuatus, or the spectacled fruit bat, experienced 23,000 to possibly more than 30,000 deaths because of the heat. It was estimated that there were only 75,000 of these bats before the heat wave, so over the course of just a few stupefyingly hot days, a third of the individuals in this species in Australia died. This will have dire ecological consequences, as the bats are effective pollinators for trees in their forest habitat in northern Queensland. Another species of bat, called the black flying foxes, experienced 10,000 deaths in the same time period for the same reasons. Experts have described the bats as being like canaries in a coal mine with respect to climate change. This is because these bats don't have any particularly special defense against the heat that other animals don't have, and they've expanded into urban areas, so when they die, people see it right away. Other animals might be similarly vulnerable to the heat, but they may live farther out in the bush, where their baked-to-death bodies are unlikely to be found. Unfortunately, with climate change getting worse and worse, it's quite likely that these heat waves are going to become more and more common, and much more intense, and many more animals are going to lose their lives.